Story 1. My grandfather always used to say that the woods have a memory. They remember the paths that have been walked, the secrets that have been whispered, and the things that have been lost within them. He was an avid hiker, and he taught me everything I know about navigating the wilderness. The most important lesson was how to read trail markers, the colored blazes painted on trees that act as your lifeline back to civilization. He taught me to trust them above all else. A compass can break, a GPS can lose signal, but the trail, he'd say, the trail always knows the way home. Ooh. I wish he had also taught me what to do when the trail starts lying to you. Last fall, I decided to take a solo hiking trip into the Green Mountain National Forest in Vermont. It was a trail I'd done a dozen times before, a familiar 10-mile loop that was more of a comfort than a challenge. I set out early, the air crisp and filled with a scent of pine and damper. The woods were beautiful, a kaleidoscope of autumn colors. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. It was just me, the crunch of leaves under my boots, and the steady, reassuring presence of the blue trail markers leading me forward. The first sign that something was wrong was subtle. I came to a familiar fork in the path. I knew from memory that my trail, the blue trail, veered to the left by. Today, the blue blaze was painted on a tree to the right, on a path I didn't recognize. I stopped, confused. I pulled out my paper map. The map confirmed it. The trail was supposed to go left. I thought it must have been a reroute. Sometimes the Forest Service changes a path due to erosion or a fallen tree. It was strange, but not impossible. Trust the markers. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. So, against my better judgment, I took the path to the right. The new trail was narrower, more overgrown. The woods grew darker, the canopy of leaves becoming so thick that it blocked out most of the afternoon sun. Poop. The air became strangely still and silent. No birds, no rustling squirrels, just the sound of my own increasingly heavy footsteps. The blue blazes were still there, appearing on trees every 50 yards or so, but they looked different, fresher. The paint was a brighter, more vibrant blue than the faded, weathered markers I was used to. It looked like they had been painted recently, very recently. After about a mile, I came across the second sign, by a small child's backpack. The kind with cartoon characters on it was hanging from a low-hanging branch. It was clean, as if it had been placed there only moments before. There was no one. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" My voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. I didn't touch the backpack. I just kept walking, my pace quickening. The trail began to lead me in a slow, wide circle. I knew this because I could see the sun, what little of it penetrated the leaves, in the wrong part of the sky. Blue blazes kept appearing, leading me deeper into this unfamiliar, silent part of the forest. I can tell you how two Then I saw the third marker, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't a blaze of paint on a tree. It was a blue t-shirt, identical to the one I was wearing, nailed to a tree trunk. It was stretched tight, a single rusty nail driven through the center. I stopped dead, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a reroute. This was a trap. Someone was out here, leading me, toying with me. I spun around, intending to run back the way I came, but the path behind me was gone. It wasn't just overgrown. It was as if the forest had sealed itself up. There were no tracks, no broken twigs, nothing to indicate the way I had just come. There was only the trail ahead, marked by another fresh blue blaze in the distance. I was completely, utterly lost on a trail that someone else was creating just for me. I had no choice but to keep moving forward. The fear was a living thing now, a cold presence at my back. Every shadow seemed to hold a figure. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. The blazes became more frequent, more personal. A water bottle, the same brand as mine, a single hiking boot, a perfect match to the ones on my feet. It felt like the forest was shedding my own skin, leaving pieces of me behind as a warning. As dusk began to settle, the trail finally opened into a small, dark clearing. In the center was a single, ancient oak tree, and nailed to it, over and over, were dozens of items. T-shirts of every color, hiking boots, water bottles, backpacks, compasses, knives. It was a shrine of lost hikers. The final, horrifying trail marker. I heard the snap of a twig behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what had been following me, what had been laying this path for me. I just ran. I ran blindly, away from the clearing, away from the trail, crashing through the underbrush, not caring where I was going, only that I was getting away. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and I collapsed at the edge of a stream. I followed that stream for hours, all through the night, until it eventually led me to a road. A park ranger found me at dawn, incoherent and covered in scratches. I tried to tell him about the trail markers, about the clearing. He just gave me a sad, knowing look. He said, "I wasn't the first person to get turned around in those woods. P," said the forest plays tricks on you. "But I know what I saw. It wasn't a trick. It was a carefully laid path. I don't know who or what is out there, painting those false trails, collecting souvenirs from the people it leads astray. But I know that somewhere, deep in those woods, there's a clearing with a single oak tree, and it's still waiting patiently for its next hiker." Story 2. My family has owned a small, rustic cabin in the woods of northern Minnesota for 3 generations. It's not a place for luxury. It's a place for escape. No electricity, no running water, just a sturdy log structure, a wood-burning stove. and acres of dense pine forest that stretch as far as the eye can see. I spent my childhood summers there, learning to fish and build fires. The woods were my playground, but last winter I learned that some things that play in the woods aren't friendly. Prayer. I decided to spend a week at the cabin by myself in January. I wanted to experience the true silence of winter, to write and to disconnect from the world. I drove in before the big snowstorm, stocked the cabin with enough food and firewood for a week, and settled in. For the first few days, it was blissful. The world was muffled by a thick blanket of snow. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the wind sighing through the pines. The strange feelings started on the fourth night. I was sitting at the rough-hewn wooden table, writing by the light of a kerosene lamp. A powerful gust of wind hit the cabin, and I heard a sound that wasn't the wind. It was a whisper, a long, drawn-out, sibilant sound, like the hissing of static that seemed to ride on the gust of wind and pass right through the walls of the cabin. I froze, my pen hovering over the page. I told myself it was just the wind whistling through a crack in the logs. But the sound had felt too close, too articulate. It had a texture to it, a cadence that felt like speech, even though I couldn't understand any words. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being listened to was suddenly overwhelming. The cozy, familiar cabin now felt like a glass box in the middle of a vast, dark wilderness. Breathe. I went to the window and peered out. The moonlight was bright on the fresh snow, illuminating a pristine, untouched landscape. Nothing, no tracks, no movement, just the silent, stoic pines, standing like sentinels at the edge of the clearing. The whispering started again that night as I tried to sleep. It would come with the gusts of wind, a chorus of faint, hissing voices that seemed to be just outside my window. I pulled the blankets over my head, my heart pounding, and eventually fell into a fitful, uneasy sleep. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I put on my snowshoes and crunched out into the brilliant, cold morning. I was about a quarter-mile from the cabin when I saw it. In the middle of a small clearing, there was a circle of pine. It was a perfect circle, about 10 feet in diameter, with each pinnacone placed neatly, point up in the snow. It was unnatural, deliberate. It was a message. Back to where slowly, my eyes scanning the surrounding trees, I felt that same cold dread from the night before. I was not alone out here. I hurried back to the cabin, constantly looking over my shoulder, the silence of the woods now feeling menacing. That night, the whispering was louder. Boom. It wasn't just outside the window anymore. It sounded like it was coming from all around the cabin, from every direction at once. And this time, I could almost make out words, fragmented and layered on top of each other, in a language I didn't understand. It sounded ancient, wrong. I barricaded the door with the heavy table and sat in a chair by the dying fire, a heavy axe in my hands. I stayed awake all night, listening to the whispers ebb and flow with the wind. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, the whispering finally stopped. I was exhausted. but I knew I had to leave. I packed a small bag with only the essentials, my hand shaking so badly I could barely zip it up. I was about to unbarricade the door when I looked at the window one last time, and I saw them, pressed against the glass. From the outside were dozens of handprints. They weren't human. They were long and thin, with too many joints in the fingers, ending in what looked like sharp, pointed tips. They were arranged in overlapping patterns, as if a crowd of unseen things had been standing there all night. Their hands pressed to the glass, whispering, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the handprints were on the inside of the frost that had formed on the window pane. Whatever had made them had been so close, its heat had melted the ice, leaving its impossible shape behind. I didn't use the door. I smashed the back window of the cabin with a chair, scrambled out into the snow, and ran. I ran 4 miles, my lungs on fire, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, parked 2 miles down the logging road. I never went back to the cabin. My family eventually sold the property. They think I just got spooked, that I let the isolation get to me. They don't know about the perfect circle of pine cones or the impossible handprints on the window. They don't know that the whispers in the pines weren't just the wind. It was something in the woods, something ancient and patient, something that had been watching my family for generations, just waiting for one of us to finally listen. Story 3. Hunting is a tradition in my family. Brew. It's about patience, respect for nature, and understanding the rhythm of the woods. My father taught me to hunt in the deep woods of rural Pennsylvania, on a piece of land that had been in our family for generations. The centerpiece of our property was an old, rickety deer stand my great-grandfather had built. It was a simple wooden platform, 20 feet up in a massive oak tree, overlooking a clearing where deer often came to graze. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a place where you could watch the world wake up. But one morning, I watched something else wake up instead. I was 16, and it was my first time hunting alone. My dad had dropped me off at the edge of the woods before dawn, trusting me with his favorite rifle. I made a familiar trek to the deer stand, the air cold and still, the ground covered in a thick layer of morning fog. I climbed the ladder, settled into the small wooden seat, and waited. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and burning away the fog in the clearing below. It was a perfect morning. The woods were quiet, peaceful. I sat there for hours, perfectly still, listening to the sounds of the forest. I wasn't just hunting for a deer. I was soaking in the solitude. Around 8 a.m., I heard a sound that didn't belong. But it wasn't a twig snap or the rustle of leaves. It was a low, rhythmic humming. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. At once, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the wood of the deer stand and up into my bone. I scanned the clearing. My rifle held tight. The humming grew louder, more intense. It wasn't mechanical. It felt organic, alive. I looked to the edge of the clearing, where the thick woods began, and I saw a flicker of movement. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it was too tall, too thin. It stepped out from behind a tree, and my breath caught in my chest. It wasn't an animal, it was a man, or at least it looked like one. He was dressed in old, tattered buckskin clothes, like an old-time trapper. His hair was long and matted, and his face was covered in a thick, unkempt beard. But it was his eyes that terrified me. They were wide and completely black, with no whites at all, and they seemed to glow with a faint internal light pose. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his head cocked to the side, and the humming sound was coming from him. It was a low, guttural vibration that emanated from his chest. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the deer stand itself, as if it were an old friend. I was frozen in fear. I slowly raised my rifle, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I centered the scope on his chest. He still hadn't acknowledged me. He just stood there, humming. Then he started to move. He walked slowly into the center of the clearing, his movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette with tangled string. He stopped directly below my deer stand. He tilted his head back, his black, empty eyes looking straight up at me. He knew I was there the whole time. He raised a single dirt-caked hand and pointed at me. And then he smiled. It was a wide, unnatural smile that stretched his face too far, showing rows of sharpened, yellowed teeth. It wasn't a human smile. That's when I heard a new sound. Creaking, groaning sound coming from the deer stand itself. I looked down and saw, to my horror, that the thick wooden support beams of the stand were beginning to bend and twist. The wood was groaning, splintering, as if under an immense, invisible pressure. It was like the stand was trying to bow, to kneel before the figure below. I scrambled backwards, dropping my rifle, which clattered to the wooden platform. The man on the ground just kept smiling, his black eyes fixed on me. The stand groaned louder, the wood beginning to crack. I knew it was about to collapse. I didn't think, I just acted. I leaped from the deer stand, a 20-foot drop into the soft, leafy ground below. I landed hard, pain shooting up my leg, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran, not daring to look back. I could hear the sound of splintering wood and the final thunderous crash as the deer stand collapsed behind me. And over it all, I could hear that low, guttural humming start up again. I ran all the way back to the road, my legs screaming in protest. My dad found me an hour later, a panicked, sobbing mess. We went back with the local sheriff. The deer stand was a pile of splintered lumber at the base of the oak tree. My dad's rifle was lying in the debris, its stock cracked. But there were no footprints in the clearing other than my own. No sign of the man in the buckskin. We never hunted on that land again. My dad sold the property a year later. He thinks a bear must have pushed over the old, rotten stand. He doesn't believe my story. But I know what I saw. I saw something that the woods remember. Something my great-grandfather might have seen when he first built that stand. Something that doesn't like to be watched, and that considers those woods its own sacred ground. And it's still out there, humming in the clearing, waiting for the next person to climb too high. Story fur. For a wildlife photographer, the woods are a cathedral. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow, every fleeting glimpse of an animal is a prayer. My passion is capturing the hidden life of the forest, the moments that happen when no one is around. To do this, I rely on game cameras, Moshu-activated cameras that I strap to trees, believing them for weeks at a time to be my silent, patient eyes in the wilderness. I've captured some incredible things. A mother bear with her cubs, a majestic buck in the morning mist, a rare bobcat slinking through the undergrowth. But last summer, in the deep woods of the Appalachian Mountains, one of my cameras captured something that wasn't meant to be seen. I had set up a new camera in a particularly remote part of the forest, an area I'd been scouting for weeks. It was miles from any trail, a place that felt truly untouched by human hand. I left it there for a month, my excitement building with each passing day. When I finally went back to retrieve it, I was like a kid on Christmas morning. I couldn't wait to see what secrets the forest had revealed. I got back to my small cabin, plugged the SD card into my laptop, and started scrolling through the thousands of photos. The first few weeks were what I expected. Dozens of pictures of squirrels, a few deer, a curious raccoon that had sniffed the lens. All normal, all beautiful. The strange images started appearing around the 3-week mark. The first one was taken at 2:17 a.m. It was a blurry photo, the kind you get when something moves too fast for the shutter. It looked like a deer, but its legs were too long, its proportions all wrong. I dismissed it as a glitch, a trick of the light and motion. But then there were more. Night after night, the camera would trigger, capturing these same strange, distorted images. Blur of pale skin here, a strangely elongated limb there. Never a clear shot. It was as if whatever was out there knew about the camera and was intentionally moving too fast to be captured properly. A sense of unease started to creep in. This wasn't an animal I recognized. Then I came to the photos from the final week, and the nature of the images changed. The first photo of the week was taken just after midnight. It wasn't a blur. The image was perfectly clear. It was a human hand, pale and dirty, holding a small, smooth, grey stone. The hand was holding the stone up to the camera lens, as if presenting it. There was nothing else in the frame, just the hand, the stone, and the blackness of the woods behind it. My heart started to pound. Someone had found my camera, but why would they just show it a rock? I scrolled to the next photo, taken 24 hours later, at the exact same time. It was the same hand, but this time it was holding a small bundle of twigs, tied together with what looked like a strand of dark hair. Night after night, the pattern continued. Bird's feather, a strangely shaped piece of bark, a single white mushroom. Each night, a new offering, presented to the lens of my camera by that same pale, silent hand. It wasn't a threat. It felt like a courtship, a series of gifts from the woods delivered by an unseen suitor. The thought was more terrifying than any overt act of aggression. I was scrolling through the photos, my mind reeling, when I got to the images from the last 2 nights. The night before last, there was no offering. The photo, taken at the same time, was of a face. It filled the entire frame, pressed right up against the lens. It was gaunt and pale, with no hair, and its eyes were wide, dark pits. Its mouth was open in a silent, circular O of a scream or a song. The image was so clear, so horrifyingly detailed, that I slammed my laptop shut with a cry. My hands were shaking. I had to know what the final night's photo was. I took a deep breath, opened the laptop, and clicked to the very last image on the card. It was taken just an hour before I had arrived to retrieve the camera. The image was of the clearing, but it was different. The camera was no longer strapped to the tree. It was on the ground, pointing up at an odd angle, and in the center of the frame, where the camera was supposed to be. Man-like figure, built out of sticks and twine. It was the same height as me, and hanging from its stick figure neck was my spare camera lens cap, which I had accidentally dropped at the site a month ago. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was what was behind it. In the background, just visible through the trees, was the unmistakable shape of my small, isolated cabin. The message was clear. The gifts were no longer for the camera. It knew where I lived. It had followed my scent back. It had left me a final offering, a little effigy of me, to let me know that it wasn't just my eyes in the woods anymore. I was its new point of interest. I didn't stay to pack. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and my laptop, and I drove. I drove all night, not stopping until I was in a crowded, well-lit city, surrounded by the comforting noise of traffic and people. I deleted the photos. I smashed the SD card. I tried to forget, but I can't, because I know that something is out there in the quiet, remote places of the world. Something that watches from the shadows, that leaves gifts in the night, and that sometimes, when it gets curious enough, decides to follow you home.